the challenge is there's actually no perfect pricing model for any business. I don't care how much you hear me say or someone else say how much they love like outcome-based pricing or how outcome-based pricing is the future or usage-based pricing is the future, or seats are dead. Regardless of like what you hear, it's really about being aware of the trade-offs you're making, what's right for your product, what allows you to tell the story around what you're building, who you're building it for, how it helps customers be more successful. Those are conversations that I think are much richer and much more productive for companies to really see increasing value over time. You don't really see those conversations online as often.
Hey everybody, got a quick question for you. Is your job easy, stress-free, and full of rainbows and sunshine every single day? Yeah, I'd say that's a big fat no. Hi, I'm David Noe, host of Speakeasy HR, presented by Payroll Partners, and proud to be part of the Work-Defined community. Take a step down into my Speakeasy live on LinkedIn and YouTube, where we tackle HR and business challenges through raw, uncut, unfiltered conversations. This is HR like you've never heard it before. Bold, real, and full of practical takeaways. Real guests, bold insights, authentic conversations that drive change. Catch every episode on demand through your favorite podcast platform or all the content at speakeasyhr.com.
Welcome back to the Meg and Amy Show.
Yay!
Hey, Meg, did you know we just hit 300 subscribers?
So amazing. Thank you everyone who's helped us build this amazing show. It's just blowing my mind. And we're just getting started.
Yeah, and we know that you are so busy, and so we really appreciate you spending the time with us. But we do have another ask for you, and that is to make sure to comment on our podcast. We want to know, we want to hear from you. We want to know what you think, what you like, what you don't like. We want to know who you want us to interview. We want to know what topics are resonating with you and where you'd like us to dig in further.
And we would absolutely like you to subscribe and follow on whatever channel makes sense for you for your regular podcast watching, because that really helps us amplify the show to more people. So thank you for that.
And evidently we've heard if you like it, that helps too. So maybe do that. Also, speaking of cool, our guest today is Kyle Poyar. Kyle is the creator and writer of Growth Unhinged. He's spent the past 15 years helping software startups fuel growth, monetize their products, and become category leaders. I believe that Growth Unhinged has almost 80,000 subscribers now. Wow. He was previously an operating partner at OpenView, where he led marketing and partnered with founders on scaling revenue from $1 million to $100 million plus ARR. At OpenView, he coined the term product-led growth, now a household term. Maybe not my household, but
in my household.
Yeah.
Yes.
Before that, he was a director at Simon Kucher, the leading consulting firm specializing in pricing and packaging. Kyle enjoys tennis, cooking Mediterranean food, hiking, and he is forever trying to finish a Barry's workout. So you have shared with us that you have been able to write yourself into rooms that you weren't invited to. And this is something that Meg and I feel deeply. We've lived this statement. So tell us some of the rooms you've managed to squeeze into because of your writing.
Well, I haven't been invited to a lot of rooms. How much time do you have?
This is a room.
But I mean, it goes back to, I mean, I went to high school in a small rural high school in outside of Cleveland. We had 200 or so people in my graduating class. It was not a place where, you left the state for college, let alone go to an Ivy. And so, back then I got into Brown, but then I was like, how the heck am I going to pay for this? And I found a website that listed like every single scholarship that you could possibly apply to, and found the ones that required an essay, thinking a lot of people aren't going to write an essay. You couldn't write an essay with ChatGPT 20 plus years ago like you can now. And I applied for dozens and dozens of them and I believe I ended up getting more than 12 total. And that allowed me to, move to the East Coast, go to a great school, and even within Brown, I wrote an academic paper that I pitched and got published in an academic journal, a peer-reviewed journal. I wasn't even a senior in college yet at that point, so they didn't really do maybe as much fact checking as they could have. But I found writing to be the great equalizer. People judge you based on your ideas and what you have to say, not necessarily who you are, what you look like, where you're from, even what your kind of resume says on paper. And I've kind of carried that with me through, my first job out of college, writing a research study that I'd pitched to journalists to get covered. And then now I write a newsletter that reaches almost 80,000 people, which is incredible.
Yeah, well, as Meg pointed out, you wrote yourself into our room. So congratulations. That's probably your biggest accomplishment.
I think it is.
Right?
I think you're right.
You have become the voice on SaaS pricing and beyond, and monetization in general. So take us back to when you first recognized that the pricing shifts we're seeing weren't just tactical changes, but actual structural transformations that would reshape the entire business model as we know it. When was that aha moment?
Well, I'd say it's been an evolution, right? So I started my career at the largest pricing strategy consulting firm, right? So I was working even back then, back in 2010 timeframe. There were a number of like on-prem to SaaS transitions that were still happening and a lot of pricing models to figure out. And at that point, a key learning was that it really wasn't just about getting the price right. Like, yes, you had to figure out subscription pricing and was it seat-based or something else, but really the entire business model, right? You now had customers that could churn. How are you going to support them? The sales behavior changed, and what was the profile of reps? And there were all of these changes that happened to businesses. And then fast forward, there was a little bit of, I would say, like less exciting times in software pricing and monetization. There were not a ton of changes for for a while. But then going into, say, 2019 through 2021, 2022, started to see the rise of both product-led growth and usage-based pricing. Obviously, AWS and a number of others were pioneers, but started even seeing usage-based models apply to HubSpot and a lot of places where it hadn't been before. And the realization was that essentially we were democratizing access to using products. So instead of it being like a 7-figure purchase that was CapEx done by an executive where it had to be sold, on a golf course, software was getting much more accessible. The onus was on the vendor to deliver value really quickly. Customers wouldn't keep spending money if they weren't seeing value in the product. But also there was an ability to unlock TAM because you essentially allowed your product to be used by a lot more people, and you uncap the upside with the very, very best customers who are the most successful. And so there was that evolution, and I'd say it's continued now. We're in a time where AI products are unlocking newer models like outcome-based pricing that were really not common at all in the SaaS world. But it's this ongoing pattern towards moving from really charging for access and really charging a significant amount to software to charging based on value and being on the hook to really take on risk and own the value delivery with the customer.
You mentioned the product-led growth and the usage metrics. So how do you see, you said them kind of almost interchangeably or just as a pair. How do you see those together?
Well, so with usage-based pricing, it's kind of the ultimate form of product-led growth because if people stop using your product, they're essentially canceling with their usage, right? And every day they need to make a decision about whether to keep using your product and therefore keep paying for your product. And also, any investment in R&D that increases usage with the customer inherently increases spend, right? And so R&D becomes a revenue generating function, which is really product-led growth. The product is driving growth opportunity. And so I think of that as, it's very much a part of the product-led growth equation. And many people think of product-led growth as, say, like freemium and free trial offers. And that's certainly a part of it. And I think with freemium and free trial, people don't pay for the product unless they get to an aha moment. They see value. They ideally see value quickly in a matter of days, if not minutes. And with AI, it's like going down to seconds. And so I think they're highly interrelated. But kind of it's this idea of trying to make sure that we're not just charging customers for shelfware, that we've delivered them something where they paid a lot of money. We're celebrating because we hit our revenue goals, but don't care about what happened on the other side. And so it's shifting from that mentality to a lot more onus to really only get paid when customers see real results.
Yeah. So obviously, you may or may not know this, but sort of Amy and I have lived through these transitions within big organizations, making these transitions. So your roots, the beginning of your story about how this is more than just a pricing element, but it changes the business model, it changes the compensation, it changes how sales is oriented to the customer, it changes, all of that. We experienced that firsthand in SaaS transformations. We're in very large companies managing this transition. And a couple things that we have observed in doing a transformation for companies that are successful in whatever the legacy business model is, and then having to transition based on market conditions or opportunity, is that there is a tremendous amount of muscle memory in an organization tied to the behaviors that drove growth to a certain level. And so these pricing shifts oftentimes become hard because the data that you might look at when you're a big company within a successful business under a different architecture for how the business is set up, it becomes really hard to see the emerging data because you're kind of have a filter bubble of how you see it, and your numbers are so big that it's kind of a really hard for people to break this apart. So one of the things I love that you do in your blog is you bring forward examples and stories of companies and how they've either navigated a transition or tested out pricing structures that help bring that data so that people who haven't lived this kind of change before could maybe get their head around it. Was that always part of your blogging process, or did that come from your roots as a sort of pricing strategist person, or like when did you realize that bringing those examples forward was going to be key to helping people understand what you were saying?
I think for me, I've now probably written hundreds of blog posts, and I don't even want to guess how many words are out there. But what I realized was the content that resonated best. And honestly, anytime you write a blog post or even a social media post, the great thing is how quickly you get feedback. Now, sometimes that feedback is crickets, which is its own kind of feedback. Sometimes it's people disagreeing with you, but a lot of time you can really gauge based on the quantity and the quality of feedback, like what is really resonating with people. And what I realized was that there was a direct link between what I was working on hands-on with companies, as whether a consultant or an operating partner. If I could take that lesson learned with a tangible company, or from working on a tangible problem, if I could distill those insights in a really practical way based on that experience, rather than just make it theoretical or some sort of theory that doesn't actually work in reality, when I could make it practical, people were able to take that and apply it. And that just made it so much stickier in people's minds, because now instead of just reading something that was a useful read or an insightful read, they would say, hey, look, I read this piece. I did the things that you said. We tried it and it increased revenue or it had X impact. And I was realizing the impact of that was so much greater when you could actually distill things down to almost like a how-to or a really specific example of what a company did. And so that to me,
And then you created your own flywheel because then there were more examples.
totally, that becomes the flywheel in and of itself. And so but that to me became kind of the learning of take what I'm working on with companies, open source it, usually through LinkedIn, see what resonates. If something resonates, go deeper. And I usually, turn that into a newsletter post for Growth Unhinged. And then that attracts, people that want to, work with me to solve hard problems. And it can all ideally be a flywheel that, builds on itself. And to me, it's the best form of content is really not just someone in an ivory tower writing, thinking it's going to help people, but it's written kind of with a community. And that kind of community mindset, I think, is what makes everything hopefully resonate with folks based on kind of lived experience.
What was one of your most useful how-tos that you shared? And could you share that with our audience that resonated with folks?
Done a lot of these over time. One of them was during, I think it was like 2020, 2021 period. I did a deep dive on a usage-based pricing playbook that was essentially like the steps to change your business model towards a usage-based model. And that was based on, I think I had worked on 5 or 6 of the transitions towards usage-based pricing in the last year. And then I went and interviewed about 25 people that had been making that transition. And I looked at data around company performances and companies that were usage-based versus not. And I distilled that into like a 50 or 60 page deck with like exactly the steps involved and like getting into what do sales comp plans look like? Do you allow rollovers? Like all of this, the nitty-gritty details, even like, hey, you probably shouldn't call anything overage. You should call it flex or on-demand usage because overage sounds like you're penalizing the customer because they couldn't predict upfront how much they would need. And it just got into that level of specificity. And I did not think that was going to be something that appealed to a super large audience. I was okay with that because I was like, as long as it's valuable to the right people, that's fine. It ended up being probably one of the most popular things I've ever written because people now felt like they had a guidebook for, this is not an easy thing to change. I can educate my management team about what's involved. We can all get on the same page and we can plan around what we're going to need to do now and in the future to really kind of run with this business model. But that was one of the first things I wrote that really resonated. And I kept being surprised by, I would get emails like months and months later with like, hey, on slide 36, you had this in the footnote. Could you elaborate on that? And we're like, oh, people are actually internalizing this.
So you recently did a roast on all of the pricing models without really a winner. So would you still recommend to people to move to a usage-based pricing model, or like in what circumstances would you recommend that versus a different pricing model? I loved your roasting post, by the way.
Well, for folks that hadn't read it, what I wanted to convey is that there is no such thing as a perfect pricing model. I don't think I've met any company that is universally excited about their pricing model. I mean, if you can find those people, send them my way. I'd be very curious to hear what they have to say. But there's always something wrong with it, right? And if you think about common options or common models, if you charge like a flat fee subscription, it's super easy for the customer, super predictable, easy to sell. But if you're including AI in that package, you could have runaway AI costs and a fixed amount the customers are paying you. So you could have unprofitable customers. You have no way to expand your customers who are the most successful. Your flat fee might be too expensive for people that just want to try you out or are new, right? So there's all these trade-offs that you have to encounter. And I think that the challenge is there's actually no perfect pricing model for any business. I don't care how much you hear me say or someone else say how much they love like outcome-based pricing or how outcome-based pricing is the future or usage-based pricing is the future or seats are dead. And I'm guilty for saying some of those things, probably verbatim. But regardless of like what you hear, it's really about being aware of the trade-offs you're making. and being very thoughtful about what trade-offs you're willing to live with and which you're not willing to live with. What's right for your product, what allows you to tell the story around what you're building, who you're building it for, how it helps customers be more successful. And then just have a real thoughtful plan for how you're going to adapt to the trade-offs that come up. And so if you're a flat fee business with no expansion potential, well, maybe the expansion is we can actually build new products and we can sell those as additional products as their own flat fee prices. Or maybe it's, there's different ways of thinking about the evolution. And those are conversations that I think are much richer and much more productive for companies to really see increasing value over time. But you don't really see those conversations online as often.
One thing I'm very curious about is the tension of unit economics. So if we look at the forward-looking AI innovations, there really isn't a lot of predictability in the cost structure or even in the context, because there's just so much innovation going on in foundation models that it's very hard to predict what the future is. And in trying to navigate an AI opportunity, there's a lot of tension and a lot of pressure from the board or from, the executive team to figure out how to get something to market that is able to scratch the AI itch in whatever category you are. How do you recommend people keep their eye on the ball from a unit economics point of view while simultaneously capturing the momentum that they need to capture? Because I really worry that there's a different, pricing is something that most people don't have really a well-grounded understanding of the core principles of how it plays out over time. And so it's very easy for people to oversimplify the trade-offs, as you mentioned. You have to be aware of the trade-offs. Depending on your role, those trade-offs could be owned by someone else, or maybe something that you don't have to be personally responsible for. So then it doesn't really feel like a trade-off to you in the same way. So what is your best recommendation for people for that tension? How should they think about the compromise between capturing AI momentum today and making sure that the unit economics don't run away such that they regret it when they're actually a successful business later?
Yeah, I guess I'll share, two thoughts on that, and I guess one that's more short term, one that's more mid to long term. Before I even jump into that, I think just level setting, there were a lot of people that thought AI costs were going to drop 10x every year. And essentially, why worry about AI monetization right now? It's fine if we have negative margins. Let's just go for distribution. Distribution's all that matters. Once we get the customer, hey, even if we're unprofitable today, if the costs drop 90% next year, we're in the money next year. Things are great. We won the market because we had distribution. I think people are now seeing that that's not what's playing out, and that the LLMs are not necessarily getting that much cheaper. Now, older LLMs are, but the next gen, latest and greatest, maybe the models from Anthropic, are still quite expensive. Your customers want access to the best technology. They don't want, yesterday's newspaper. With these new models comes longer context windows, the ability to do more reasoning, agentic capabilities. Well, even so now your cost per token isn't going down and you have way more tokens. And so if anything, AI costs aren't dropping 90%, they're increasing by, orders of magnitude potentially, depending on how your customers use it. So I think one thing is just sort of let's bust that myth. And we do have to think about AI costs. And I'm not a cost-based pricing person. I really think about your customers don't care about your costs, but cost needs to be at least be an input to make sure you're not going to market with something unprofitable. And then, so what to do about that? Well, the thing that everyone seems to have decided in the last 3 months that they should do is people have almost all universally decided we should launch some sort of credit model. And I actually give credit to give credit to folks like Salesforce, because Salesforce had said we're going to charge for AI on a per conversation basis. And then in really a matter of months afterwards, they launched a flex credit model where instead of paying a fixed price per conversation, you pay based on the actions that AI is delivering. And so if it was doing more to fully resolve a conversation, that was going to be more expensive than if you just enriched a contact or updated a CRM record. And so it was much more granular, much more fine-tuned, and the cost per credit allowed them to cover their AI costs. It also allowed customers to start, maybe pilot AI for certain use cases, make sure there was real ROI there for the amount of credits, and then expand the amount of credits they bought over time. And so I'm seeing credit models, applied for good or for bad across, Salesforce, but, also you could look at a Clay.com, a Lovable, Bolt, Monday.com, Atlassian, you name it, they probably have some sort of AI credit concept.
Most recently, we were at SAP, and SAP had put in a credit model for AI as well. But the struggle that customers were having at the time were twofold. One was that the credits were so generic, and you had, kind of buying centers in different, that there was the HR buyers and the finance buyers and the IT, and they all kind of had to share the credits and didn't really have visibility into what each other was doing. That was one. And then the other was just the unpredictability, which of course you've written about a lot in terms of usage. And one customer had likened the methodology to when their teenager had a usage-based cell phone and they got like a $900 phone bill, right? And there was just no ability to control their people, especially like in the HR use cases where it's not just a small group of people that are using the functionality. It could be every single employee across the company.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
how are you seeing like this was now a couple years ago, but how are you seeing organizations deal with those issues with credits?
I think it's that's certainly part of the biggest part of the problem. If you look at, I think the cell phone analogy is apt, but it's even just, hey, it's kind of like you're having a kid's birthday party. You let the kids go to the arcade, and all of a sudden you have a bill for hundreds or thousands of dollars based on all the games they played. And you're like, what the heck happened? I think that's absolutely a challenge. Within credit models, there are credits that are tied more to costs, and it's sort of a pass through of your infrastructure costs. And then there are credits that are tied more to the outputs the customer sees. And I think like part of it is having to make a decision. Are you doing more cost-oriented credits or output-oriented credits? I think output-oriented makes it a little bit easier for the customer to understand ROI and to predict how many credits they'll need. That way they're also not paying, for using the infrastructure the wrong way. They're only paying to actually get the outcome that they're trying to get. And that way you can even start to tie the credit consumption to different types of output. All right, you need X, HR-oriented outputs, Y, marketing-oriented outputs, Z, sales-oriented outputs. There can be sort of some cost visibility for the buying team. Now, I also think that the onus is on the vendor to really do a good job helping the customer link their usage to ROI. And so if I think back to like a Twilio, for example, Twilio was early in usage-based pricing. It's an SMS platform, or historically an SMS platform to send text messages. And for their customers, they have no idea how many text messages they're necessarily going to send. It's like a developer tool. Developers might use this. All of a sudden, there's like millions of messages happening. But if I'm a Twilio sales rep, what I'm going to try to do is say, all right, how do you want to use Twilio? You want to send appointment reminders to your customers. Well, what's your no-show rate today? How much does a no-show cost your business? If we could send a text message reminder before their appointment, how can we reduce the number of no-shows? And all of a sudden you can start to show how one message is only, a penny or a fraction of a penny. and that saves you all of this money in terms of, reduced no-shows, you're able to make a real case for getting a high ROI, and that helps the customer be okay with lack of predictability, because they're like, hey, the more messages I'm sending, the more value I'm getting. And so it's actually okay that we don't know exactly what it's going to cost, because there's real alignment here. And that ability to articulate value and get to the customer's mindset is really hard to do, especially in more horizontal or sort of like, I'd say like generic AI. It's much easier to do if you can get really vertical specific into really tangible workflows for the customer.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking it would be really helpful to show like this, this conversation costs this much, and, all of that. But to a regular employee, like they don't really care, right? The regular employee is like, great. Yeah, so that's
whatever.
That
Someone else's
costs 2
problem.
cents. I can have 1,000 more conversations, right?
Even in the sort of place where we all have gotten used to usage, so in our cloud compute, right? So whether that's Amazon or Google Cloud or Azure, those of us that have run very large data centers know that there still can be a lot of hand waving and a lack of clarity of how that's being used. Even in my own home, I really didn't realize until this week that there actually is a threshold for Wi-Fi. And the reason I figured this out in my, personal cable was my college student has been home for the summer, and it turns out gaming uses a lot more data than
I had no idea. That's
right. Exactly. Until I get a note that like, hey, you're towards the end, although, it's the end of the month, I think I'm going to make it through fine. But it was still just like this moment of like, okay, I really have no idea how that works or how you're charging me for it. And I didn't realize I need to pay attention. And, even the same, we have a solar system in our house, and we're supposed to get credits for the electricity, but different times of day and all of that. I mean, like just the mental math of that becomes kind of like, okay, it's just so complicated. I struggle to care. And in these usage patterns, it's more than transparency of content. It's clarity of through line, right? Like understanding what, to your point, what the value is and how that's going to translate to cost, and what is that going to look like for your customer, and what is that going to look like for your business. I was very surprised to find a couple weeks ago in the Mostly Metrics blog that, and like this is a business I'm in, I've been in, I should know, but I was shocked to learn that public companies define ARR differently. Like there's no standard. And so I can see us getting to a point where there's no standard at the top line definition, and there's no standard at the cost line definition. And so there's a really big need for somehow simplifying this for everyone, so that we don't end up in a situation where only, small concerns can happen because nobody else can take the bet for this shift. And yet I think we can all see that we are shifting, right? Like traditional seat-based fixed rate is not going to be competitive in the world of software tomorrow. And so these kind of levers. So one of the things that I'm curious about is if you were designing from scratch, kind of like a foundation that would give you ultimate flexibility in this, what are some of the key things that you would want the technology that you were offering to a customer to be keeping track of, so that you could really do a better job of connecting the dots to value, and to making sure you could not only make a good case to acquire a customer, but also build that product-led growth momentum going forward? What kinds of things are you seeing people keeping track of and monitoring to make good decisions in this area?
As we kind of talked about earlier, credits is the short term solution of, what everyone's done to protect costs and try to, not be on the hook for like super unprofitable customers. But I think where we go, or hopefully where we go, is much more value-based and outcome-based for the customer, where we're able to have much better conversations about the ROI they're going to see from their AI adoption, and also be convinced that their AI adoption was successful, and that's going to, drive them to not just do a pilot of AI, but roll it out into production use cases. And I think that one of the companies I've been following most closely and been most excited about how they've done it is Intercom with their Fin AI product. I interviewed their co-founder, Des, in my newsletter recently, but they were early in saying, for our AI product, we're only going to charge you for successful resolutions. So we're going to charge you 99 cents per conversation that AI resolves. And we're going to define a resolution as, XYZ factors. We're also going to let you set cost thresholds so that, hey, we think that you're going to save money for all of the AI resolutions, but if you end up having cost concerns or whatever it is, you can turn off the AI feature and just go back to manual, at a certain point. So you have control over budget. You can audit to make sure that, a resolution is a resolution. And we'll also provide you tools so you can see where AI didn't make a resolution and what was the root cause of that. And it might be, hey, we didn't have a help desk article on this topic. And we're going to give you the tools to get, more and more resolutions through AI, which helps you and helps us. And then I think that the other thing that they're doing that I think just is very inspiring is they're educating their customers about how to buy AI. And so in their world, it's, hey, you might consider, build by decision, building this in-house, or, buying an off-the-shelf technology. Or maybe even just not adopting anything and staying with the status quo. Well, here's the typical cost per conversation when people resolve conversations. Here's the cost if you use AI plus people. Here's the cost if you use AI plus people and you build it yourself. And here's how you can evaluate the pros and cons between those different decision points. And I think that that's an approach of actually educating people about how to buy AI that most companies have not gotten to yet, but we need to get to if they're going to have the confidence of really rolling out the technology.
So you have an upcoming keynote, 6 rules for AI monetization, and you've talked about most of those rules here today. One of them is have the pricing talk with your customers. Is this what you're referring to, or are you talking about like have that pricing talk before you figure out your pricing strategy?
Absolutely. So with the pricing talk, many companies, and I'm constantly surprised at how often this happens, many companies still have a technology-driven product organization, right? Where they have an idea of what to build. It's maybe informed by what they've heard, but they focus on what they're going to build, and then they go, "Oh, we're about to launch this. How much are we charging for this again?" And then it's kind of a rush decision to figure out pricing.
That doesn't sound familiar at all.
Nope, never happens.
No, not familiar at all.
And what I'm a little bit worried about is with all of these AI coding tools, it's actually easier to build products than it was before. And so we are, again, going to build more technology without understanding the customer perspective and how to monetize it. And so I think of it as having conversations early, ideally before deciding what to build, but also using these conversations as a way to really understand the buying psychology of your customer. So it's not necessarily asking them, hey, what would you pay for this? It's saying, what is your approach today? What's working about that? What's not working about it? What's your biggest frustration? How high is this on your priority list to change? What is this? How many hours does your team spend doing this? How hard is it to hire for this role? How much turnover is there in this role, right? Like if you could adopt a technology that would solve this for you, like how interested would you be in buying that, right? Like how does budgets work? Would this come out of technology or headcount budget? Like there's so many questions you could ask that help you really understand the decision-making process of your customer. And to me, these are integral pricing questions that should be asked as early as possible And they're also just good sales discovery questions too. And those are questions that I think really inform the best path to monetization. And you need to be comfortable having those conversations, ideally having them, early and often.
That's so poignant, and it's like having any difficult conversation. People avoid it like crazy, and especially in my experience as myself and other product managers, that's not like we want to give features and give like it's thinking about ourselves as charging money for it is really difficult, but it's a skill that really needs to be built.
And I love your point about don't start and say, what would you pay for it? Because honestly, they never know. And it's not particularly, it actually throws the conversation out from a place where you could really learn something. So I love the idea of focusing on the buying psychology. So to your point about budget, I have a theory that the way that we budget for this technology really is going to need to change drastically in the flow of this, because I think as we look at the potential with agents, the cost benefit does span what we would have traditionally thought of as productivity technology, whether that's your Slack or your email or your phone systems or whatever, and what we think of as work, right? Which would go into cost of goods or cost of delivery for your business. And so I'm just curious, when you have these budget conversations, is anyone asking those questions in your circle or in any conversation that you've had about, hey, we might need to think about how we capture the budget and tied to this value differently?
Well, that's absolutely a top of mind conversation. I think it is the $1 million question, right? Of can AI tap into headcount budget? That's what's going to make the difference between how large TAMs are, how big of companies get built, how much is spent on these products, if we can sustain the cost of building these products. Because if people treat it as just a technology item or part of the technology budget, we're probably not going to live up to the AI hopes and dreams. But I think when you think about how to do that, though, a lot of it is learning from your customer, but also a lot of it is educating the customer. And how you price can fit a narrative, or it can hurt your narrative. So if you say, hey, look, our AI is going to do X, Y, Z autonomously. It's going to do this work for you. It's an AI agent that's part of your team, yada, yada, yada. We charge $25 per seat per month. You go, wait, I thought the AI was doing the work. But you're charging me per seat? Who is the seat? Like who's logging in? That's a very different narrative than if you say, hey, for this role, a typical person is able to answer, a typical customer support agent might be able to answer 5 to 10, tickets per hour at a 90% resolution rate. We can deliver, that, but 24/7 availability, always up. It can flex up or down. No need to hire more people. It's not going to quit overnight. And we can actually prove we have a higher customer satisfaction than a manual response because we respond immediately versus having them, wait a certain amount of time. And so if you're able to have that conversation, it's like, why wouldn't the customer think about this as part of their hiring or headcount budget? But there's a lot of proof on the vendor to really be able to make that case. And I think that part of it's a pricing piece of the puzzle, and then part of it is just being able to really clarify the outcomes the customer is going to get and how valuable those outcomes are.
You've talked a little bit about kind of the pricing no man's land, Kyle, and just that often there's a bit of a, who owns this dilemma. So, we're always really interested in organization, optimizing organizations and roles and that sort of thing. So, as pricing is going to be evolving so quickly, do you have any recommendations on how companies should set up their organizations and what sort of roles should own the shift and what metrics they should be watching?
Pricing is an interesting topic because it's one of the most powerful revenue levers. I mean, if you're able to increase price 10, 20% without customers churning, like that's a lot. That's a pretty big revenue impact that you can deliver relatively quickly. And yet there's often not someone who owns pricing or monetization in a company, especially not until a company's maybe 100 million ARR and beyond. So folks, are not dedicated to thinking about it. They don't have skills for it. They haven't done it before. And it touches a lot of stakeholders. And so there's I think, a very big gap in a lot of companies between the benefit from having a stronger monetization function and the reality of what that function looks like today. And I think with this no man's land concept is that in the early stages of a company, really the founder is driving everything. The founder is the head of product. They're having the conversations with the customer. They probably are doing founder-led sales. They might be doing founder-led marketing. And so not only did they own the initial pricing, they actually also have a closed loop of, okay, we understand how the customers reacted to that pricing. We can change pricing. We can convince everyone to change it. We can then see what happens when we changed it. Once you start getting to like 5, 10, 20 million ARR, the founder starts to hand that off. I mean, they have a lot of other things on their plate. They're scaling the org. They're offloading sales to a professional sales leader. They're hiring a marketing leader, right? They're hiring a product leader. Pricing is often one of the balls that gets dropped as founders take it off their plate and no one is putting it onto their plate. And for me, I am less concerned about who actually owns pricing. I do think many companies don't necessarily need a head of pricing or someone with pricing in their actual job title. But you need a function to own pricing. You need a person that has pricing as at least part of their responsibility. And then you need some sort of cross-functional group that can convene to review pricing data and make pricing decisions. And that group probably needs to involve product, sales, marketing, finance, and ops. And so anyone from those functions could actually be the one who leads the committee and drives those conversations. But you ultimately need input from multiple people. And I always say, I don't really care who owns pricing as long as someone owns it. They do the work and collect the data, and they involve the other stakeholders in making the decision.
And how does a founder know when it's time to make that happen, move it from their own closed-looped orientation to the committee model?
So usually when they have leaders in seat for these key functions, so as they have, a actual product leader, marketing leader, sales leader, and so on, that's an important signal. I think also there are some companies that have, their pricing is maybe okay as is. There's not warning signs that it's broken. And then there are other companies where they're constantly losing deals because of price. Some customers are saying they're too expensive. Others don't seem to care at all about their pricing and just buy really easily. Or if they're launching new products that need to be monetized and no one's really thinking about that until it's too late. Or if they find that they have unprofitable customers. There can be some warning signs. And if those warning signs are flashing red and there's no one that's consciously raising them to the executive team and trying to figure them out, that's also there's the ball is being dropped here and something that's really important for the business.
Back to those things that you were talking about the early warnings, the unprofitable customers, I think is one where I have seen a massive gap, especially in businesses that are pretty successful and have been around for a while. I find that there's often a lack of discipline to go back and look holistically at the business for business decisions that were made 5 years ago or whatever that probably made sense in that context, but no longer maybe hold true for where the business is going or where the competition is going. Have you seen any best practices in that of businesses that are really good at going back and re-questioning past model decisions as part of this pricing to say, hey, what would be the right way to be identifying that versus letting it drag on for a long time without it being noticed?
I think, many companies like to kick the can down the road on those hard conversations. I think in hyper growth mode, the reality is like most of your revenue is going to come from people who are not already customers. And so that legacy base is it's maybe okay to wait on. As you get more mature and as much more of the revenue growth comes from existing customers or just hitting the number comes from existing customers, that's not something you can, ignore anymore. And then I think to the extent you expect the majority or all of your customers to be adopting AI features, that's where things can really change in terms of like, oh, we undercharged, but it's probably fine. We had 80-90% margin. So like, who cares? To,
Right.
oh, wow, this is a really unprofitable customer now. And so I think AI adoption and understanding the AI usage at a customer and an account level should be a factor in that decision making.
So powerful. I just want to like restate it because this is like, I think really, really important. If you're in a high growth stage, you can probably be okay if your model going forward is one that supports the business. Some of your early customers, you might be fine. But when your revenue growth is more than 50% of your revenue growth or around that is tied to existing customer upsell and retention, you really, really need to look at it. Or when you're introducing new products, especially AI products, which we know have a different cost basis than in the past. So I think every business should really take this discipline into their operational playbooks, because I think that is the only way you're going to notice that you have opportunity that you're not capturing in your business.
So you've positioned usage-based and hybrid/credit-based models as stepping stones towards outcome-based and maybe value-based pricing. If you're right about this progression, what does the software industry look like in 2030? What's your grand prediction, Kyle?
My grand prediction, well, there's like what should happen and what the reality is. What's going to happen?
Well, let's make it happen.
You can do optimistic version and the other kind too, if you want.
I think, look, if I put my like Sam Altman optimistic hat on, AI is going to be increasingly good at doing real work, doing thinking on its own, taking complex sort of information or context to do real work that is, skilled work. And I think as that happens, we'll get more comfortable with the idea of AI coworkers or AI agents that are kind of part of the organization, doing different things for us. And those AI agents or AI coworkers will be a combination of essentially like cloud employees that do work and getting access to tools that enable that work. So databases and conference calling and whatever tools they need. And I think that as we move towards that model, the vendors that are successful in this model will need to understand the exact things that the AI employees or the cloud employees are going to be doing for their customers. And they need to find a way to compete that's tied to being able to deliver at a higher quality than their competitors, or deliver at a similar quality but at a lower cost. And I think the best way to pitch that message is to be really, really clear on the outcomes that the customer is trying to get, which might be different across different customers, and proving that you're able to deliver at those outcomes at a really high rate that ideally competitors can't match, and that you're able to get better and better over time, whether it's through like your technology improving, the feedback loop with the data, whatever it is. And I think that if we're able to do that, that allows us to have much more actually customized pricing that is right for an individual customer. We're able to make sure that we're charging in a way that's commensurate with the value a customer is delivering, and that we're able to make pricing feel really predictable for customers because they're only paying when they're getting results back that are the things that they're looking for their business. And I think like that's the model I expect to see a lot more of in 2030, but it is really hard to make all of the changes necessary to get there.
Well, we'll definitely have you back on, and we'll decide how far we've come for sure.
We'll have milestones in between now and then.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, I'm excited about it.
This has been absolutely brilliant, Kyle. Thank you so much. Your deep expertise is a breath of fresh air on this topic. I know so many people have found you already, but hopefully we can help others find you as well.
Appreciate it. Well, it's a fun conversation. Yeah, I guess we'll circle back in 2030.
All right. You ready for Leadership Corner?
You bet. Let's do it.
Okay. I was recently promoted to lead my peers. Thing is, they are older than me and male, and I'm not. I feel like a terrible imposter. How do I overcome this and get the team on track?
Wow, this sounds like me advising my, 23-year-old self and my 26-year-old self. And
I got asked this question this weekend, and I was like, oh, it brings back memories.
Yeah, only thing I will start with is, oh my goodness, when you start with the idea that you're younger than everyone, just know that that's a temporary state. You will always potentially be a different gender, but the younger part doesn't last long. So I think I would just focus on a couple things. Number one, remind yourself that you got this opportunity because you earned it and because of your capability. So this opportunity is something that you have earned, and you owe it to yourself and your team to do the best job you can. And spending time focusing on what you are not is not helpful to you doing the best job that you can. So my strong advice is recognize that this promotion requires you to put your head in the game and to deliver something that really matters, because you wouldn't have been promoted to this role if it wasn't to do something in this role. Focus on what that is, and then invest in building the relationships with your team to understand how they can help you on your journey. So all of the time you're investing in thinking about imposter syndrome, all the time you're investing about what you are not, is taking away from you investing on what does the business need, what is this opportunity that is unlocked for you, and how can you work with this amazing group of experienced men to deliver what the business needs to deliver. So you need to value their experience, you need to value what they're bringing to the table, but you also need to value why you were chosen for this role and what the business needs you to accomplish. Put your sights on that, set aside the energy that you're putting about what you are not, and invest in who you need to be, who you need to know, what you need to do to be successful in the role.
Yeah, and I think that it's important to acknowledge that it is hard. So there is a balancing act that women have to take on when they get into leadership positions. And there's a book that Meg and I have recommended before, I think, but we'll bring it up again. And it's a recent book called Likeable Badass. It's just fantastic because it really cuts to the heart of a lot of the emotional load that women have to take on to be both assertive and strong, but then also very warm and likable, right? And to constantly in every situation bring through both of those. Like you don't want to diminish your badassery. You want to go strong. You want to be powerful. You want to dominate, but at the same time, you need to be very conscious of how you are being perceived and that people like you, that they trust you, that they feel warmth from you. It's really hard, but she does a fantastic job in this book of showing a way to navigate this. So highly recommend that book if you haven't already read it. And then I have my favorite mantra, which is everyone is full of shit. So when I ever hear the term imposter syndrome, like those boys, men, whoever they are that are reporting to you, they're just as full of shit as you are. So they don't know anything that you don't know. That even if they've been around for decades more, maybe they're going to have experiences and strengths that you don't have. We talked about that on a previous show. But there is, from a value to the world, you have just as much value as anybody else.
And congratulations. You're going to kill it.
All right. Well, this was a fantastic episode. Kyle was amazing. We're so grateful to have his expertise out in the world. I hope you all enjoyed that expertise as much as we did. We're going to put the note about his upcoming keynote in the notes so that you can all participate in that if you'd like. And do keep sending those Leadership Corner questions. We asked you earlier in the show, but please comment and let us know what you're liking and what you'd like to see happen on the show.
And who other guests we should know. We really are enjoying learning from people that are adding to our corpus of knowledge, challenging our thinking, and helping us establish a path forward from where we are today and where we're going. So I think this is exactly what we were hoping for when we started the show, and I'm just so grateful for the progress that we've made. So let's invent the future together, everyone. I believe in us.
Make every day count.